Windows 95. You know it and you all pretend to love it, but I'll be the first to admit that Windows 95 sucks. Well, kinda. Don't get me wrong, it was very innovative for the time if you never used a Mac before, but Windows 95 and by extension all the Windows 9X operating systems don't really hold up well anymore, and were even a bit of a struggle to use in the 90s due to their instability, even though they were game changers, and hopefully I can explain why in this video. Welcome to Let's Test Operating Systems, where we once again revisit a past subject on the show in celebration of its 30th anniversary. In fact, this is actually the first operating system I showed on LTOS all the way back in 2015. Hell, it wasn't even 20 years old at the time I uploaded the video. Now that video, much like my entire 2015 catalog, was absolutely fucking terrible, and I don't recommend trying to watch it, but it's worth noting because it exists. Anyways, by the time you're watching this, Windows 95 is 30 years old, and honestly, I can believe it. As a computer operating system, it's about as 90s as it gets, whatever that's supposed to mean. I don't think I can really talk about Windows 95 without discussing the external factors around its release. Personally, I'm not much of an expert on culture, and if I wanted to derail this entire video, I would have asked my pop culture teacher to talk about the 90s as somebody who actually lived during that era. Instead, I'll just talk about the computer landscape of the time, since that's a bit more of my forte. Windows 95 was released to meet the needs of computer users at the time, while pushing technology forward and being one of the first operating systems to really support the birth of the World Wide Web. How did it do with this? I don't know, blue screen on me. In all fairness, Windows 95 was competing mainly with Macintosh System 7.5, an operating system that struggled greatly with multitasking, and as I'll discuss in another video, Macintosh computers at the time weren't known for their stability. In fact, I even mentioned in the last video. Go watch that after this one. Microsoft also had Windows NT at the time, which was a full-blown operating system that ran its own kernel from startup to shutdown. But at the time of Windows 95's release, Windows NT was much more demanding and less suited for home users, so in that regard, it makes more sense as to why they didn't push Windows NT 3.51 as hard. Before Windows 95's release, home users were stuck with MS-DOS, a text shell from the 80s that Microsoft dragged into the 90s because it's just what PC users expected. And Windows was little more than a graphical interface for said text shell. Windows 95 was sort of a half measure whose kernel still ran on DOS, but the Windows UI was prioritized and users by default would boot straight into Windows as opposed to a DOS prompt. Windows 95 was also pretty much nothing but new features. We talk about the start menu, but Windows 95 introduced just about everything you see in the modern Windows layout. Truly a time-tested design that Microsoft somehow managed to make worse in recent releases. Windows 95 introduced multi-user support, so if you have multiple user accounts on your computer, a login prompt will be displayed for users to sign into their personal desktop. This was more common in professional computer environments, and I'm sure this was common with Linux by this point, but it made a lot of sense for families in the home. Plus, macOS didn't have this feature until 1999. It was at this point I had to actually look into what other features that they actually added to the system that nobody really cares about but do exist. Windows Explorer received an upgrade and became the main user environment, which also brought in the desktop and recycle bin, concepts that Apple beat them to by about 11 years. Plug-and-play support was also introduced, even if peripherals didn't really support that until USB became common in the late 90s. With all of that said, it's time to actually take Windows 95 for a spin. Windows 95 opens up with text on the screen saying starting Windows 95. This seems to be carried over from the starting MS-DOS screen you get previously when a PC was booting up. After a few seconds, io.sys apparently displays a fancy new boot screen with the Windows logo in the clouds. It's even animated, with an active loading bar at the bottom of the screen. Later OEM releases of Windows 95 would have a slightly different boot screen advertising Internet Explorer as being part of the system, and funny enough, the loading bar animation was basically reversed. Regardless, you then get the previously mentioned login prompt, and I think you know what happens next. Even if you've never used Windows 95, you know this sound. Hell, I even used it a few times back in the Windows 10 episode. 20 years from now, you'll still hear the sound in memes, music, and throughout culture because it's timeless. Oh, it also welcomes you with a tip every time you log in that helps you get accustomed to the new UI. They even give you a little tour to guide you on how to get things done, which I'll skip over for this video because I assume you already know how to use a modern computer. Now, Windows 95 does have the option to install the old program manager from Windows 3.1. As for the new desktop, it looks okay. By default, there's no wallpaper applied, so it's just teal. The rest of the UI uses a sort of industrial design similar to that of Windows 3.1 and has more depth than the Macintosh UI of the time. Oh, and if Boomer Computer was an image, this would be it. So in this early version of Windows 95, the Windows Explorer is much more primitive than it is in later versions of Windows. Every time you open a new folder, it opens a separate window, which I don't think was even a thing in Windows 3.1's Explorer. Sacrifices had to be made for that start button and that corner clock, I guess. Later versions of Windows 95 would actually get an updated file explorer that was integrated with Internet Explorer 4 and would also backport Active Desktop to Windows 95. Functionally, it's pretty much the Windows 98 Explorer, but it has a different style. Speaking of Internet Explorer, Windows 95 sure does come with it. Early versions came with IE2, but it could support all versions up to 5.5. I don't know why you'd want that though, since everyone knows Internet Explorer is fucking garbage. You also got Microsoft Exchange for an email client, where you would receive Nigerian print scams and random exe files that would destroy your computer. I know it sounds like I'm joking, but these were things that people actually fell for back in the 90s. This would seemingly get replaced with Microsoft Messaging or something in the late Windows 95 era. Now it's time to talk about the start menu. This is, as one might expect, the most basic version of the start menu to ever exist, but it's not that bad. It does do everything you might expect it to do, like having a shortcut to settings, your applications, documents, and allowing you to shut down the computer. It also features the run command. God bless the run command, allowing you to type the name of any app on your computer and run it immediately. Genuinely one of the most useful things in the entire Windows system. Speaking of apps, Windows 95 does at least do everything you'd expect a computer to do out of the box, including the ability to actually play CDs this time, something macOS 10 Cheetah can't even say. On an unrelated note, here's a fun trick you can try at home. Open a run box and type in con/con and hit enter. Instant system crash, and now you have to restart your computer. Now it's time for me to complain about the system. First thing I have to complain about is the fact that on this Panasonic laptop I was testing with, it wouldn't consistently boot unless I disabled user accounts. I'm not sure if that's an issue with the OEM install it has, but it constantly locked up on boot if I didn't do that. Okay, I didn't actually intend for this to happen, but it did freeze on boot this time, and I disabled the login screen, and it still froze up on startup. Windows 95, the true experience. Second, there's no option to stretch your desktop background. It can only be tiled or centered. The full screen backgrounds were clearly only meant to be viewed in 640 by 480, and it looks terrible when it's tiled. Except if you buy Microsoft Plus, you can actually stretch your background then. Weird. This wasn't such an issue in 1995, but plenty of multi-sync monitors, even of this era, supported higher resolutions. This Panasonic Toughbook even has a 1024 by 768 LCD, although it was produced in the year 2000, but older laptops tended to run at 800 by 600. This laptop also has no scaling technology, which is actually worse. Finally, I want to talk about stability. Windows 9X has never been known for its stability, and while that problem wouldn't be a major complaint until Windows Me disappointed the world, it goes all the way back to our good old friend Windows 95. The system is highly prone to shit like memory leaks that lock up your system, throwing fatal errors from a single program doing something it shouldn't, or falling apart like a Jenga tower if you eject a CD at the wrong time. Or if you're like the 8-bit guy and your company has a network drive hooked up to Windows 95 and the drive becomes unavailable for some reason. Bonus issue, if your CPU is too fast, you can't boot Windows 95. Even in a virtual machine, you can't boot Windows 95. Someone complained on the previous video about me applying current day opinions to an ancient operating system, but I have two counter examples. First off, Windows 98 2nd Edition doesn't have a clock speed limit, and by extension, neither does Windows Millennium Edition. I actually didn't research that. I don't know if that's true or not, but just trust me on this one, please. Second, Windows NT 4.0, released just 1 year later, does not have a clock speed limit. Windows NT isn't very fun to install, but it has a wider compatibility range over Windows 95. Despite the negativity I've shown in this video, I do still like Windows 95. It does feel familiar and easy enough to use, works well with really old hardware, and introduced the iconic Windows UI. Unfortunately though, Windows 98 does just about everything Windows 95 does, but better. I tend to find myself using that for my vintage computer needs over the less capable and more unstable Windows 95. It makes a Pentium fly, but it makes another Pentium crash and burn. And it laid the foundation for an operating system that's known for fatal errors. but that'll be covered in due time. Until next time though, happy 30th birthday Windows 95. I hope your back is doing okay. Thank you all so much for sticking around for this review of Windows 95, and as well for the support on the series, and I will see you in the night sky.